Angelo, thank you. Critics call it an educational equity failure. In fact, that's the title of a Wall Street Journal op-ed that challenges progressive education policies and how those policies often harm the very students it's supposed to help. This time, though, teachers in Newton, Massachusetts are calling out the failures of an experiment to try and put students with diverse abilities, skills, and backgrounds in the same learning groups. Joining us now to discuss this and more is Parents Defending Education Senior Advisor Michele Exner. Good morning to you, Michele.
Hi, good morning, Jan.
I had never heard of this. Now, this is something called multi-level classrooms, and basically, as I understand it, it is a way to put kids at all levels in the same class. So it did away with, honors classes, college prep, and high schools as an example. But now teachers in Massachusetts have signed a petition to roll back these policies because they see no benefit in this. Tell us more about it.
Absolutely. And so multi-level classes, yeah, it's a term that most parents have never heard of. And again, it's ambiguous. It sounds, maybe it's not that negative, but at the heart of it, it's equity at its worst, and it's failing all students. And again, just as you mentioned, this isn't just parents in the community. This isn't just us saying it. These are the teachers themselves. This week, in fact, one of those teachers, a faculty lead for Newton South Public High School, he put an op-ed in the Boston Globe that said, "We are failing these students. We have tried this for 3 years. The stats are in, the results are in. This needs to stop." He also helped lead a petition that was signed by every STEM teacher in that school, by every world language teacher in that school as well. And again, what they did was they took the advanced students, they took the students that are more academically vulnerable, and they combined them all in one classroom. It set up the teachers for failure. There was no training to help the teachers accommodate this massive change. And 3 years later, there was no system in place to actually do a metric, do a study to see how successful this was. And so the teachers took matters into their own hands. They did a survey, and they looked at the stats. And in every single instance, in one of these particular studies, the students that were in the single track, right, maybe those advanced students, the college prep students, they all performed better than the ones in multi-level classes. And so it stopped the sugarcoating, right? This was a failure on all students. And again, this is from the teachers themselves.
I want to read a quote from an article written about this and how teachers are revolting as a result of this 3-year progressive policy failure. Listen to this. Teachers, especially new hires, say they feel unheard and unsupported. During one meeting, an educator recounted their experience of finding a colleague crying in a closet because they felt like such a failure teaching multi-level. One world language teacher compared the challenge of meeting the varied needs of students to teaching a class where half the students are learning colors for the first time and the other half are analyzing a Salvador Dali painting. There is nothing wrong with learning either, but in one room, it's impossible to teach both simultaneously. So what's interesting about this, Michele, is that you can see the frustration, you can hear the frustration with these teachers that are really suffering right now. And of course, as you said, some of the most vulnerable students right now are the ones that are being failed in all of this. Yet administrators still have not signaled they're going to get rid of this. What kind of response have these teachers received?
Oh my God, their response was actually quite unbelievable. They said, "We will look at this in May of 2025. That means it's far too late to implement any kind of changes for the 25-26 school year." So they've essentially said, we're going to continue to fail students for yet another year. And again, for what? To make themselves feel good, right? Because they've used these words. And at the heart of it, they're failing these kids, right? These classes are becoming less engaged. You have the vulnerable students who are afraid to speak up. You have the more academically advanced students who don't want to say anything because they don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. And again, as we talked about, right, these teachers are not being supported. They're speaking out, and they have the administrators at the district level that are just not listening.
Everybody's suffering at this point, all the students and all the teachers. Very quickly, global test scores show that the U.S. students have slipped further than any other countries since the pandemic, especially in math. And research to show school closures played a part in this. Tell us more about this research.
Absolutely. It's more of the same. I think most of us have been saying this since 2020. School closures they were bad for students. They were catastrophic for students, and the results continue to pour in. This is just another indicator showing that. The U.S. Across the board had one of the most longer-term disrupted learning for students around the world, and these test results prove it. In fact, there were about a dozen countries that performed better than United States in these test scores. And just to give you an indication of how bad they were, the U.S. scores were no better than our scores were in 1995.
Wow.
That means there were decades of gains completely wiped out.
Yeah.
U.S. rankings fell to 24 out of 45 for education systems. And I think this was the most heartbreaking point, that the highest performing students were okay. And I think we knew that was going to be the case. But those in the bottom 10%, they saw their scores drop by 37 points in math and 22 points in science compared with similar students in 2019. Yeah. And it's so devastating that this public policy failure of officials in our country did this to these students. And again, this is not, this is an ongoing problem. These are tests that indicate future economic success for a society and our national security. So this is a big issue. And I think a lot of us are breathing a sigh of relief that in January, we're going to have some changes in Washington.
We did lose, it seems like, a generation of American kids there. Parents Defending Education Senior Advisor Michele Exner, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Jan.